Greetings, Africans and community members. My name is Monica, and I'm with the All African People's Revolutionary Party. And what we're going to be doing is waiting for people to join us today. Thank you so much for joining us live here. I'm just connecting with our tech person. I am just checking the feed to make sure that we are live and ready to go. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us live today. I'm Monica with the African People's Revolutionary Party. So excited to have you all here today. We're going to wait for a few more people to join us, and then we're going to get started right away. We're going to be having some guests that we're excited to interview today. And we are just thankful for you all joining us for Pan-African Weekly News. We know people are on New Mexico time and they are trickling into the Facebook Live and YouTube live stream. So thank you so much for joining us for our weekly Pan-African news series. The All African People's Revolutionary Party, we are a Pan-African socialist party with the goal of unification socialist Africa. And so we are about African liberation of our people here and all across the diaspora and the continent of Africa. And the weekly Pan-African news, what we do is before we even start, we want to do a land acknowledgement. We recognize and honor that we are on indigenous land, that we are on Tiwa territory, and we are in solidarity to fight for our indigenous relatives to have their land back. And also we are fighting for our land back in Africa, and always want to acknowledge our support of land back and how that is critical to the movement of our indigenous relatives. We also, for every show, what we do is we call an ancestor in. And for today's show, because we are interviewing the John Brown Breakfast Club, what we, for our ancestors, we're calling in today is the Black Panther Party. What we want to honor and recognize for the Black Panther Party is their free breakfast program that they created starting in 1968, feeding over 20,000 children within 45 programs. And that was not only the community defense program that they created free medical centers, they created ambulance community services for our people. And what's critical about that is we have the ability to save ourselves, and that is critical of what we can do as a community. And so mutual aid has always existed, and it's existed with African leaders and other leaders, indigenous communities, Chicanos communities, and just want to acknowledge the Black Panther Party for their efforts and how many of us have continued the efforts of making sure that people have access to food. And that's critical because the war on poverty during the 1950s and 1960s created so much detriment into our communities and really created more challenges and food deserts that we continue to see to this day. And because of that, we're just really honored to have the John Brown Breakfast Club today with us, who will be interviewing and learning about their work. So we want to welcome Oliver and Bonnie, who will be here on the show today to join us. And we are totally support and down with what they do to defend the people, making sure people are fed every Saturday, and we're going to hear more about them. So Oliver and Bonnie, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for having us. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes, and we thank our ancestors for being here with us to fuel the work that we do on a daily for our community, and we continue their work. So, Oliver and Bonnie, if you can kind of introduce yourselves before we get into the interview.
Sure. You go first.
Okay. Yeah, my name's Oliver. I lived in Albuquerque for 7 years. I recently moved about a year ago out of Albuquerque, but I still help from afar with the John Brown Breakfast Club, kind of playing those roles of doing some of the social media and things like this, right? And I'm very interested in building mutual aid and community defense infrastructure, building autonomy and kind of power in the work among working class and marginalized people, so we can, one day get out of capitalism and actually live, dignified lives.
Thank you, Oliver. Bonnie?
I'm Bonnie. I was born and raised in Las Cruces, New Mexico, and I lived in New Mexico for most of my life, except for 2 years in Philadelphia. Growing up and just kind of in my experience, I've seen that a lot of the time, what we call mutual aid, and it's kind of providing support to each other within the community without relying on government or other, without relying on these different institutions. That happens organically pretty often within these communities, and that's something that I've always strongly believed. And so through this work, it's been a good way to kind of, first of all, see that in action even before we get involved. It's just great to see the way that different community members help each other out in absence of any kind of social safety net. And that's kind of one of our goals also through the John Brown Breakfast Club, is to promote, to kind of strengthen those connections and, make and even, create, as Oliver was saying, work toward even more autonomy and eventually creating completely autonomous communities.
Thank you so much. And you're getting right into the first question. So if you can kind of elaborate, what is the John Brown Breakfast Club, and describe the work of John Brown Breakfast Club?
So the John Brown Breakfast Club, we named ourselves for John Brown, who fought alongside enslaved people and took up arms against the government forces at the time, with the goal of abolition, eradicating slavery. And so similarly, we chose that name because we try to see ourselves as, betraying these institutions that a lot of us benefit from, like white supremacy, like settler colonialism, and trying to similarly, although maybe not, we haven't yet done some of the things that John Brown and the people he worked with did, but we are similarly trying to work against those institutions and to reject any kind of benefits that we receive from them, and also to actively dismantle them. But the John Brown Breakfast Club, in practical terms, we serve hot meals to people, unsheltered people in downtown Albuquerque every Saturday. And that started in June of 2017, I believe. And I wasn't actually there in the beginning, but Oliver and his wife Laura and some other friends noticed the kind of violent effects of gentrification and displacement in downtown Albuquerque, and seeing specifically how police collaborated with small business owners and wealthier residents who are gentrifying the area to kind of try to displace poor and unsheltered and marginalized people. And so the purpose of the Breakfast Club was to claim a space for these people to socialize and to eat, and also we have always been trying to create a space where cops don't feel comfortable coming around, and they don't feel comfortable harassing people while we're congregated in that area, with the purpose of eventually working toward an even more sustainable kind of cop-free community or cop-free area. And so we used to go down every Saturday and actually set up grills and cook down there, which made for a great social environment. It gives you a lot of time to talk to people. And there's something about seeing your meal be prepared, and being able to participate in that. A lot of times people would bring donations or offer to help out with cooking even. And things have changed a little bit since the pandemic, but our goal is still creating that social space, and also a space where we can talk about what capitalism does to people and what settler colonialism does to people on a daily basis, and the way that cops harass and cause from just blatant violence to the more subtle economic violence of giving people these fines and these tickets and these court dates and et cetera, et cetera. So kind of our purpose though, like our like greatest goal would be to create like an autonomous zone or a cop-free community, and that's still something that we have a lot of work to do on. But that's kind of what I saw the biggest purpose or the biggest objective of the Breakfast Club to be, and something that we're still working towards.
Thank you so much for sharing in that work. It's so critical because the downtown community, this is where our unsheltered community lives, and they're trying to displace them and toss them away. And you are trying to say, this is where they build community. This is their space. This is their community, and they shouldn't be pushed out. So thank you so much for like elevating why that's important.
I was going to add real quick too, just like some context for like downtown. You know, when I was there, I lived like right there downtown. And one of the things we did before we kind of got the Breakfast Club going was we did a little bit of research. You know, we just like asked people who were targeted by the police, were targeted by ATC security, like what can we do to help? Like, what can we do to have your back? And a lot of the answers we had were like, you know, on Saturdays, there's not a meal offered. It would be nice to have a meal down here. A lot of answers were like, no one's around when police mess with us. Like, if it'd be nice if someone was around who could just like be there with us and support us and like see what's going on. And so kind of out of that, just doing some research and just talking with people and asking people like what they need, you know, we kind of developed this community defense project of the John Brown Breakfast Club. And, you know, and Bonnie has this great point about like, it's really, you know, the gentrification that's happening. You know, in 2008 in Albuquerque, like after that, the city sort of decided, you know, what can we do to like model the city on other cities like Seattle and stuff. And so they thought, well, we're going to gentrify downtown. We're going to do real estate development. And so if you're poor, you know, you're in the way of that. And so they have to use force and violence to remove people who are in the way of capitalist development. And so, you know, the very people that they were trying to push out through violence, we were trying to welcome and create a space of refuge. You'd be like, no, we're gonna work together to be here. And if you know, with the location we're at, if you look around, you know, before the pandemic, when we could kind of congregate as a group, you know, we'd have 100, 150, sometimes close to 200 people who would get in line, you know, for food. And you look around and there's probably over a dozen empty buildings right there in view. You got dozens of empty buildings and you have hundreds of people who don't have housing.
Wow.
So, you know, that's why we're kind of there to try to, how do we build up in a way we have the power to kind of just, you know, take back that property and make it, you know, be put to use for housing, or compel the city to do that, you know, kind of having the power to make them make the right choice here and all these kinds of things.
Exactly. Thank you for sharing the context of how John Brown Breakfast started and the journey, right? Of how like you actually asked community what their needs were, and that's how the community defense program was developed. Thank you so much for sharing that. And what you also Club understand and practice mutual aid.
And so I think that one thing that Oliver touched on, and then you also kind of reiterated, is the importance of not entering a community or trying to provide aid to a community that you're not, you know, that maybe you don't share all of the experiences with, not assuming what people want or need, and making sure that you are engaging on this kind of equal playing field, or, you know, as equal as possible given structural inequality or what have you. But you know, understanding that most of the time, like, people understand what their needs are and they can articulate them, and you just need to listen, because that is an issue. Sometimes with like organizing and different kinds of efforts, like nonprofit efforts, this idea that you're experts so that you know what's best for other people. So that's definitely something that we try to not, I guess, fall into that trap, for lack of a better word, in the beginning. And that, you know, I'm glad that Oliver highlighted the importance of actually talking to people about what would be most helpful for them. And that's to me, that's a big component of mutual aid, is approaching people with the expectation or the understanding that they really understand the needs of their community, just like you understand the needs of your community, and that it needs to be a kind of mutual exchange of information, and that you need to work together to come up with solutions. So that's one component of it that I think is really important. And the other thing is approaching this work with the understanding, you know, you hear this expression a lot, solidarity, not charity. And it's used quite a bit. I think about this expression a lot because a lot of times when we're serving downtown, people ask us what church we're affiliated with or what, you know, what program we're working for. And so it forces me to think a lot of the time about, well, what makes us different from these like programs run through churches or nonprofits that do kind of fit this charity model. And sometimes, honestly, I have difficulty answering that question as far as like our day-to-day practice. But I think another important component of mutual aid is understanding that everyone has something to bring to the table, that everybody has something to offer. And so I kind of see that with like, we have people like who will go to the food bank and come by and bring their food that they get from the food bank, or people that when their food stamps come in, they'll pick up some beans for us or some rice for us or just whatever they have and drop it off to us. A lot of time it's different now that we're cooking indoors or that we're cooking away from our location. But we used to have a lot of people who are willing to jump in and help with cooking. And a lot of the time that was really helpful, especially on weeks when we couldn't get as many volunteers just from our network. There were plenty of people downtown that were willing to help setting up equipment and cooking, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's another component of it, is understanding that with mutual aid projects, like even if it starts out as this thing, we're like, oh, well, we're serving food to unsheltered people, but we live indoors. Like that distinction should become, or at least to me, I feel that that distinction should become less apparent over time, or that, well, you're always recognizing that you have certain like benefits that other people don't, or vice versa, that you're all here to help each other, and that every, you know, not to repeat myself, but that everybody contributes to the project, and that there is a point at which you might need the type of aid that you're providing today, and that you've built a strong community and you know you can rely on them, you know, if you ever need the same. So kind of how I understand it. I don't know, Oliver, if you want to add anything or what.
Yeah.
What you want to.
I was just thinking, saying like how beautiful, like the approach that you all do around solidarity, how everyone has something to offer, everyone has something to contribute, and community members themselves would just jump right in to help like cook food to share with one another and build community. Like that is just so beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing. Oliver, I think you wanted to add something.
Yeah, just give an example of exactly what Bonnie's talking about. Like some of my best memories of helping out, you know, actually down there at the field kitchen, you know, at the Breakfast Club, is like Bonnie said, you know, like folks would already wait for us to show up with the equipment. They'd be like there, and then the minute we get there, they're like, oh, we're gonna help out, and like it would just be assembled like within minutes. You know, it's like 3 or 4 propane stoves, a lot of equipment, and they would just assemble it, and they would take. It's like they would take, you know, taking ownership of this project, right? So it wasn't just like top down, like here we're giving you food. It's like they also, it's like see it as it's their project. It's like they know that we're trying to win for everybody and they want to help with that. And so another memory, or I have like, that's a good experience, is like whenever like a security guard or a cop would come down, we kind of already had it like a kind of culture there built of like, we're not gonna, like Bonnie said, we're trying to make this a cop-free place. And everyone would take ownership of that. And, you know, people's eyes would light up when you tell them like, we're not gonna let the police around. They're like, really? Mm-hmm. Like that, because, you know, at the nonprofit models, you know, they just work with the police directly. But, you know, we're here, we're like, we're not going to let the police here, but we need your help. And so, you know, some of the best memories were like where everybody, hundreds of people are like, you know, yelling off the police to go away or the security guard to go away. And, you know, without that kind of like community there, you know, they're not going to be able to do it on their own without facing like, you know, severe consequences. But like in community with us and with like kind of those common goals and that space, you know, we're able to do that very successfully. You know, sometimes we can't stop physically the police, but a lot of times just having that kind of presence would deter them. And we kind of won that space over time. In the beginning, they tried to kick us out. We won that space over time, but I just think it wouldn't have happened without everyone's participation. So it's like they're not just a spectator, but they're participating, you know, in that project, in that goal.
The power of the people, and like for them to be empowered to see that they have that in them to do that as a collective is so critical. Yeah. And you started talking about like police and state violence. And so that really jumps into the next question. What is John Brown Breakfast Club analysis of state violence in Albuquerque, in particular against people who are unsheltered, colonized, and people experiencing poverty?
Yeah, so first I want to say like this is an excellent question, and I would actually like do some shout outs to other groups who are like even doing more work on this and to check them out. So like I've been kind of following like the anti-war coalition, as well as like the Red Nation, and of course the AAPRP, like their analysis of like how the police, operate in Albuquerque. I think there's also a group like Abolish APD that has emerged that has some great analysis. They put out some things, so check them out, for even a more detail. But from our perspective, or at least, downtown, right? We kind of have an understanding of the police that, that they're there for a certain reason, and they're there to kind of control poor people. They're there to control people who to capitalism seem like a threat, right? Or seem rebellious. And so these are people who are, of course, racialized and colonized, right? Cops, police come out of slave patrols, police come out of militias. And so already, people's just existence, being native, being, racialized as Black, already are seen as a threat to the social order, to capitalism. So the police are already targeting them. But then if just being poor and not kind of producing value for capitalism, like looking like you're jobless or looking visibly poor, you're seen as a threat. So the police are down there to control those people. But one of the things that we've always run into downtown is this idea of community policing. So I just want to talk a little bit about that. And community policing downtown was always framed as the alternative to militarized policing, or like a nicer way of doing policing, like where they can win over the community. And our experience of community policing was just a counterinsurgency tactic. It's a way to do more surveillance, to get more intelligence on the community. It's a way to get community members to turn on other community members, to like be the police of other community members. So our experience was the police downtown work side by side with business owners. Like they go in every morning to the grocery stores, to like all the businesses, and they check in. They say, who's who among in the area who's giving you problems? What are their names? Like, how can we run them out? So they work directly, and that's all done through the community policing model of, we're trying to be among the community and be friends and build trust. But it's really just a way to further criminalize people. And so it's kind of tough because when people say like, we need to like change the police, they'll throw that out as an option. And we're just like, from our experience, the community policing thing is just as violent, or legitimizes violence just as easier, because it makes it seem like it's like a nicer way of doing policing. And then the last thing I was going to say is just like our experience downtown is that they try to make the whole landscape like a prison, right? For unsheltered people and colonized people. They try to make the whole landscape a prison. What I mean by this is, if you have a good job and you like seem like you're like a respectable resident, they want you to be like a prison guard of poor people. That's one way, right?
That's that community policing aspect that you're talking about.
Exactly. And then the architecture and just everything else is like set up to punish you if you're poor, to push you out of sight, out of mind. It's like, again, like the whole landscape is like a prison. And then, they also want to actually put you in prison too, like literal prison. But before you actually put in prison, the whole landscape is already designed to be like a prison. And I think that really, those are techniques that come out of settler colonialism and come out of slavery, right? Like making just the landscape itself prison. So that's why one of our goals was always to kind of carve a space in there and be like, well, this area for at least temporarily is not going to be a prison, right? It's going to be a place where we can do something different with each other and relate differently rather than this kind of prison landscape.
Yeah, I could see that. Like it's that box, right? That they would walk in and they would have their bikes and walking on patrol, and then their cars, right? To like cast that fear that they don't belong, and like changing the narrative to say like, you do belong because this is your community. So thank you so much for that analysis.
Can I add just a little bit to that real quick? Because I thought of something while Oliver was talking that I think might be, I just wanted, like, also, like, if you think about the way that a lot of, like, the different programs that are designed to provide assistance for unsheltered people are structured, at least in my experience, or from what I've heard here in Albuquerque, going back to that idea of everything being like a prison and about kind of the demands of capitalism and seeing people who won't participate as disposable. Like a lot of these programs are modeled on making you just a better capitalist citizen. And so conditions to get housing, require you to participate in the economy in some way, or you have to go to a certain kind of job training, or you have to they're basically trying to make you just, better adapted to the demands of capitalism rather than, maybe focusing more on the issues that causes, that lead a person to the streets in the first place, whether that's, ongoing poverty, generational poverty, sometimes mental health issues, sometimes addiction. It seems like the end goal is really to just try to make you into like a worker in the capitalist sense. And I think that for that reason, a lot of people decline to participate in these various programs and shelters because of that. And that's something that I've seen a few times here and heard just from talking to people and even talking to some social workers sometimes. And then the other thing about that is that sometimes social workers and other, kind of experts or professionals can, even though they're not explicitly police. I mean, we do have this program now where social workers are working alongside cops, or they're trying to implement this as well. But even these kind of like institutional agents, I guess, or people that work for these institutions that are considered to be kinder and gentler end up serving a similar function to the actual police. And that's not true across the board, but that is something that I've heard the sentiment expressed enough that I think it's kind of something to keep in mind when we're talking about these different forms of violence that people experience.
Yeah, I was going to add, just Bonnie made me think of something I was going to say too, is like, just as an example of this, like downtown, like several of the nonprofits that try to help people, get into housing, they'll actually work with the police very directly. They'll tell the police the names of people they're working with and like where they're kind of camping out as a way for the police not to have to use probable cause to approach them, because they'll say, well, I already know them. And then they approach them and tell them to leave. And so like, they're very much working with kind of this nonprofit industrial complex, and like making them, like deputizing them to be the police. There was, a part of the John Brown Breakfast Club, like we also have participated in coalition and done some work like doing cop watches, right? And there was one time in Filchacombe Park, which is, pretty far away from downtown, but like there was like, cops up there harassing people, and we were kind of called up to help out, and we showed up, and we actually knew a lot of people who were camping there because they would come down to downtown every Saturday and get burritos. But one of the things that like we found out was just that like the police even knew people were camping there because like the day before, like one of the nonprofits that tried to house people had been there giving out water. They're really kind of collecting info, and then they went and told the police, kind of like, oh, here they are, and then they went and got uprooted. And so I think like we talk about the police is like there's actual police, but in settler colonialism, like every white person is encouraged and expected to be the police, as well as people who have more are also expected to be the police and participate in that policing of people who are dispossessed, who are colonized, and who are kind of made to be wageless, right? Or who aren't, like Bonnie's saying, producing value for capitalism. So it's like, either work or die. And if you're working and you're doing well, then they expect you to be the police and help them.
Exactly. What you're saying just resonates with me. I see a lot of like Facebook discussions around people who are unsheltered, and exactly what you're saying, like people wanted to know what parks people were at, and it wasn't because they wanted to help. They were like co-working with the police to like not have them in their community, right? And so that is so important. Thank you for like unpacking that about like roles people can play, and like how nonprofits need to like really look, the ones that are striving to support people who are unsheltered, to really unpack that and see the role that they play in doing that. And we know it's not across the board, and like how that needs to stop. Like we should not be working with the police as it creates more harm, as it continues to displace people. And I want to just share some of the comments that people are saying. It says, yes, Demetrius says, yes, if people refuse to participate in capitalism, people are pushed even farther out and away. And we know that's true, right? Like there are so many people who don't want to be part of that system because it's a Band-Aid approach. It's not really addressing those deep-rooted issues that white supremacy and settler colonialism have placed in our communities. Another comment, just like giving gratitude to you all. Thank you all so much for what you're doing. Seeing you prepare food and share food with BIPOC and trans folks in the park. So Black, Indigenous, and people of color. This summer at the Bloom in the Desert was such a gift. Also, your food is delicious. We brag about that too, right? About the burritos being the best in town. But like what you're doing is more than sharing food with community, right? It's like deeper. And like you just sharing that analysis really shows that it's intentional. Another comment says that's a great analysis about certain people being expected to be the police. Yeah, thank you so much for that. Go ahead, Oliver.
Real quick about the quality of the burritos. There's actually a political reason behind that. When we did the research, a lot of people would say like there's food available, but it's not good. It's not quality. It's kind of just like the giveaway food, right? And so people would say like they actually got like a lot of food poisoning, like when people like, nonprofits would just like hand out like bags of like old, bologna sandwiches and stuff. And so we wanted to make a meal that was like as good or better than any restaurant in the area that were kicking people out. So we were like kind of giving a big middle finger to all the downtown restaurants who were kicking these people out who look poor. We're like, we're going to make the best burrito we can, rather than just, so that's kind of a political reason too, why we try to make it good.
That's great. And one thing that makes me think about is how, now there's a lot of places that's trying to go cashless. And if they go cashless, how that would cause less access to people who are gifted like money to go buy food, right? Into these establishments that often kick them out. And so like quality food is important. Just because somebody is struggling, someone who's unsheltered, somebody who's living in poverty, they deserve quality food. So thank you so much for providing that and doing that. That's important. The last question that we have for you is how does John Brown Breakfast Club show up for African liberation?
Yeah, I think I can kind of start, and then Bonnie, can finish it out here for this question. But this is a great question. I think that everybody who's not colonized, right, should be asking this kind of question. And I think for us, it's always been about trying to like learn and develop an analysis of like settler colonialism and of like slavery or anti-Black dispossession as like the foundations of capitalism, of our society. So like develop an analysis of like what's like the root cause of these problems. And if you just think it's capitalism, you're not going to get into the root cause of it, right? It's anti-Black dispossession, it's settler colonialism, right? It's trying to eliminate Native people, it's trying to enslave African people and dispossess African people. And so I think like we try to develop that analysis. And what that analysis leads to is like a good understanding of like the role of African liberation in the liberation of all people, right? As we learn from the AAPRP, no one's going to get free until African people are free. This whole thing depends on oppressing African people. So I think like we try to develop that analysis and let that analysis guide what we do so that we are accountable to it. For one, like we don't get in the way of it, but we're also accountable to it. And I think if you're like trying to organize stuff and you don't have that analysis and you're not trying to be accountable to that, then you're going to unknowingly get in the way of it and try to stop it. Because this is how settler colonialism was designed. It was designed for, European people to sabotage and get in the way, and police, right, and control and stop these kinds of, Black liberation, Native liberation, or African liberation. So I think you have to have that out in the forefront as we do this work. And so, like, just some examples of like maybe how we've tried to do this is, for one, just offering like mutual aid and doing material support for like other revolutionary organizations and organizers, particularly colonized, right, colonized people. So we've always tried to like show up and offer meals at events. We've always tried to show up and just offer mutual aid to people who need it, particularly those groups, to help support them, as well as just like making our labor available. It's like, what do you need? Like, what help do you need? We'll do it. We're not going to try to direct or like say what to do. Just what do you need? What can we do? So I think that's what we've tried to do kind of in the John Brown Breakfast Club.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, and especially the point about, that our entire economic system and capitalism rests on the designation of African people in particular and all colonized people as being, disposable participants in capitalism, and the land that belongs to colonized people as being just there for extraction and, kind of this unfettered development, as sometimes people refer to it. And so one thing is just keeping that at the center of our analysis of why, there is so much poverty and violence in Albuquerque and in the United States in general. And then the other part of that is definitely trying to provide material support, and Oliver covered that, in a lot of detail. We definitely try to participate in as many community things as we can, with AAPRP, with Red Nation, with other groups that just want to have some good food at the event that they're hosting. But the other part of that is actually, many of us in the John Brown Breakfast Club are white, and some of us do have, access to, different resources, or maybe like more, money or other resources, just because of like these, structural inequality. And so another thing we try to do is, if we do have money outside of what we use to just produce food week to week, or like right now we're looking at getting like some winter items for people to pass out, things like that. But aside from that, we also try to provide material support to other organizations when they need it. And so when we see like fundraisers or things like that, we definitely try to redistribute some of that and to kind of because I think material support is really important. I think that, it kind of, we don't believe in capitalism and money is terrible, but at the same time, you need these resources to be able to make the changes that you want to make sometimes. And so we try to be conscious of that as well and just provide that in as tangible a way as possible, or at least it's kind of how I see it as well.
Yeah, what I hear you saying and also have seen is you're showing up more than words, you're showing up in your actions, like being recently at Juneteenth, right? And preparing food and sharing food so everyone at Juneteenth could have access to free food. Many multiple events, as Oliver, you and Bonnie stated, like showing up there in those spaces and like having your own analysis of like the role that Europeans play, right, in dismantling systems of oppression. So thank you so much for your work. Just wanting to inform the audience, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat for John Brown Breakfast Club, because we still have time for questions. I'll read a couple more comments that people have shared. It says, anti-Blackness and settler colonialism are the heart of these issues. We must center African liberation framework while doing this work together, is what Jay shared. Also, Courtney shared, thank you for showing up for our community through compassion and love bringing that you do. So you see there's a lot of love for the John Brown Breakfast Club here, like 3 years, right? Every Saturday, never failing to show up for the community, for the people. There's so much love and gratitude toward the work that you all are doing, like in your values of being around solidarity and also like building community to create those safe spaces for people who are unsheltered. Another comment says the food at Juneteenth was phenomenal. So I can echo that. I was picking some up and passing it around to our elders, right? So I was able to go pick it up and pass it to our elders. I didn't get a chance to eat any because I was moving too fast, but I have had it at other previous events. But yeah, just so much gratitude to you all for like showing up for African liberation through different forms. Is there anything else you would like to share? Oh, wait. There is a question, excuse me. Saturday is coming up. Where do we need to show up to help you as a community this weekend?
So right now, so we're always looking for people to help cook, but usually we try to meet ahead of time and just kind of have a conversation because right now we are cooking in different people's homes. And so it's just a little, just to get to know you a little bit before we get started. And it's really not. And so the best way, if you want to get involved right now, is to send a message to us through Facebook, probably. Just let us know that you want to get involved. And we'll get back to you and set up, we've been having like maybe like a just real brief 15-minute, 30-minute meeting with people just to kind of talk about our ideas and see why you're interested and then check out your availability. And so that's where I would start right now. The other thing, though, is that if you just want to come down and check it out and see what we do, we are down. It's First and Silver by the Greyhound Station, under the bridge by the Greyhound Station. And right now it's a little harder to stay right on schedule, but we're usually there between 10 and 11, usually around 10:30. If you want to show up and just come say hi and see what we do and meet the people that we work with, and even if you're hungry, so a lot of times now we have some leftover. You could grab a burrito even and come by and say hi to us and check us out. And that, then we can talk that and go from there. So.
Yeah, and we went ahead and tagged the John Brown Breakfast Club's Facebook page in the post, and so people can send a message directly there. Oliver?
Mm-hmm.
Can you repeat the question one more time?
How can people show up to help this weekend?
Oh, yeah, I think Bonnie kind of covered very well, like the kind of practical side. I mean, I would say like in general, I would like, don't wait around to do stuff, right? Like if you like the work we're doing, certainly throw in and help out with us, but also like you can just create, get organized where you're at, like create something like this. Like if you see the police are harassing people, you see there's a lot of violence happening in your area, like connect with us and we can help you. Like we can sort of share what we've learned and some of like good practices, bad practices, whatever. We can help you get something set up similar. We can work together. But I think like we need to kind of just scale up this kind of work of like a community defense like everywhere for like not only what's happening now, but for what's coming, right? We need everybody to jump in and play some kind of role of like fighting against the way that the state is just waging war against poor people. And, so don't wait around, like help out with us directly or get with us and we'll give you some ideas on how to get something going, right? To scale this stuff up, what I would say.
I'm really glad you brought that up, actually. Yeah, that's a really important point because we've been talking also about trying to expand and serve like another day during the week. But yeah, the great alternative to that would be that if you have like, a couple friends that want to do this as well, like you show up, cook some food together and then go pass it out. There's plenty of places around town that would be happy to see it. And, like Oliver said, like we're happy to talk about it and kind of, let it show you what we did or like, what we're doing and then see how that can be helpful to other people who want to start similar projects because that would be really great to see as well. And especially like, people are hungry every day of the week, not just Saturday morning. And it would be great to see like more projects like this come up because the demand's only going to get bigger, like the way, it's not looking real bright politically or anything like that. And people are going to be hungry and we need to make sure that we're there to support each other because, the government's not going to do it. So.
They're not like in New Mexico, 1 in 4 children go to bed hungry. 1 in 5 adults go to bed hungry. The population of people who are unsheltered is growing, right? So they're not going to help. So the more that we have more groups, we have the Red Nation that does their solidarity feeds every Sunday. We have mutual aid that's providing food, delivering it to people 5 days a week, including people who are unsheltered. But I like the idea that you just like offered up, Oliver, is like, how can people start this in their own communities, right? Or if there's another day that John Brown Breakfast Club could add, like that's so important. That's how we build community together. That's how we take care of one another. That's how we save ourselves, right? My son right now, you might hear him in the background, like he's on a garden class. So he's been going in and out, showing his garden and being in this garden class. And he's so excited about growing food and about sharing food and cooking food, right? And so like how we get all of our families involved in this process and we can still be safe in a pandemic. Like you all have said, you're not necessarily having 200 people, congregating, but you're still making sure that people have access to food and community. A couple more comments here. So it looks like you've been having students involved in the past. So Demetria says, my students are so excited to work with you all again. So that's beautiful and incredible. I also know there's a school downtown, Sunbelt Leadership High School. I bet they would really be wanting to get support and jump in that as well. Miriam shares, the government has no plan to keep people safe or fed. We have to take care of one another. This is so true. Like when the Black Panthers started, they were sharing food and providing food. The government had no plan. And, as they worked to dismantle the Black Panthers, because that's what they do, right? Any liberation groups, that's what they try to do. Then they started a breakfast program in the schools, right? And latchkey kids. And what does that food is? It's all processed. It's unhealthy. It's not good for our children, right? It's high in sugar. It's not healthy, right? And so even though people have access to this food, I saw a family member post a meal on APS and they were like, look at all this. It's just junk food, right? But we know when that's all people have access to, that's what they'll consume, right? Because that's that war on poverty, which is also like it's the war on the people who are impoverished. And it's also, what does that do? It creates health conditions, right? It creates like the social determinants of health that we see impacting our communities on daily. So they don't care. And what they do provide is unhealthy and harmful to us. So that's why we have to move up as a community and make sure our people are taken care of and know that like we always got ourselves, we always got our communities.
Beautifully said.
A couple more comments. Like every neighborhood could be doing this for one another. So agree. That's a beautiful vision to have. Like on every neighborhood. Food accessibility is a human right. So uplift by community taking care of one another. Bird says sending love from one care packager to another. We're loving the show. So just so much gratitude that we see in the comments to the work that John Brown Breakfast Club has been doing. And another one comment says, it's a shame because all over the country, we see cities try to limit community gardens and how we can grow food. We need to smash it up and fight back by growing gardens together and sharing food, trading and feeding one another.
Yeah, on that point, like what you just said, like about the Black Panthers, you know, the state is going to try to criminalize just us trying to care for ourselves. So they always do, right? So just our attempt to not be dependent on them, just our attempt to care for ourselves, and just our attempt to do mutual aid is already a crime to capitalism. And so I think that, you know, to defend that, like community defense for me in relationship to mutual aid is like, you know, winning, you know, having the neighborhood, having the community like own that project, like be a part of it and fight to defend it, you know. That's kind of been our experience, is like we got left alone by the police and stuff when they saw that the community wanted it there. People stopped calling the police on people who were getting burritos, you know, at the Breakfast Club because they began to meet them and know them, you know. So the community was like, they basically stamped it with approval. And then the police, at that point, the police kind of left us alone. I think that as we do these things, we have to keep in mind, like, how we're going to sustain them and protect them and defend these projects. And it's about like having everyone in the community like own it and back it and be a part of it.
That's so true. Is there any like closing words you would like to leave everyone with to share, or how people can like, is there a way people can donate to John Brown Breakfast Club? Any closing remarks that you would like to share?
There is, I don't remember our Venmo thing right now, but other than that, but maybe Oliver can help out with that. But it's been really wonderful talking to you and hearing what people have to say about this. And just every time that we do something like this, where we, you know, actually kind of get to articulate why we're doing what we're doing, it actually, you know, gives me it gives me a sense of like a renewed sense of purpose about like the project, and it makes me even more excited about it. And so it's just really wonderful. And I just really appreciate you having us on your show. It's been really great talking.
Yeah, just to echo that, I was trying to pull up the Venmo. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I'll send it, and if you wanted to share it. But also you can look at our Facebook for that kind of, we have a Venmo account. But yeah, just to echo what Bonnie said, you know, I think that a lot of people right now are, you know, really feeling down about like the election stuff, and we have like, you know, was basically becoming an open fascist that's running for president, who's calling on right-wing people to just do violence against us. I think that all that sounds like, you know, it's really kind of got people down. But I actually, at the same time, there's a lot of stuff going on where we're building power, and that gives me like a lot of like energy and hope. There's a lot going on, and I think we just need more of it. And there's more of us than are them, and we just got to out-organize them. You know, we out-organize them, and we can kind of do this stuff. And so if you don't get swept up in all the election stuff, just get to work doing direct action things. And that's where the power's at for me.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And thanks for having us on. It's a pleasure.
Thank you for being here and like leaving us and gracing us with those beautiful words, like get involved. Can't be on the sidelines. Get involved in an organization. If there's not one you want to get involved in, start one, because it's going to take all of us to really, truly create the change that we need in our communities. It's all about the people, right? I do agree. There's more of us than them. We just got to get organized. That definitely resonated with me. Bonnie, is there anything you would like to share?
No, I think that's about it. Just reiterating what Oliver said. And yeah, the election, I don't know. It's better to focus on your community at this point. I think I absolutely agree with that. And I think if we all do that, then we have a good chance of building something better than what we have right now.
And thank you so much. And just so you know, the community has showed up. posted twice, the Venmo account. So if you want to make a gift and contribution to the John Brown Breakfast Club, you can see in the comments their information is there to continue the work that they've been doing for 3 years, strong and hard, of really making sure communities have access to resources. Thank you all for joining us for our weekly Pan-African news, and we look forward to continuing to like be in community and solidarity and support the work that you all do as well.
Cool. Thanks for having us, and have a great rest of your day. We'll see you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Okay, goodbye.
Thank you all so much for joining us for the interview of Bonnie and Oliver. They shared so much of their phenomenal work that they do in the community. What we're going to do next is we're going to talk about some COVID-19 updates. So we're going to do a couple more segments of the show before we depart for today. So COVID-19 updates. So if y'all didn't know, we are still in a pandemic. We're still in a pandemic. It's critical that you wear a mask, that you also wash your hands. If you're out there protesting or in the streets, making sure you're still doing testing. It's critical that we keep ourselves safe and our community safe. We know in New Mexico, there has been there's almost about 30,000 positive cases, and unfortunately, 877 deaths due to coronavirus. So it's continue to rise. And this week alone, we had 281 new coronavirus cases. So it's really critical that we're keeping each other safe. We're still in a pandemic. Make sure that you're practicing social distancing and that you're being safe. At the national level, there has been over 7 million people with positive cases, and 206,000 deaths have died from coronavirus. And again, there is no plan to stop this pandemic. There is no plan to keep us safe. That is so many lives that have been lost, so many people grieving because this country continues to not care about us. And like literally their plan is to let people die, especially when they found out the data of 93% of the deaths are African, Indigenous, and Chicano. So again, that's their plan, is to let us die, right? It's just a form of genocide, which it's history repeating itself. There's no way in time in history that they were not ever planning to like let us die. So we know that's continuing to happen. We also know that evictions are still occurring. They never stopped happening during the pandemic. There's not data that's been released yet about how many people have been evicted nationally or locally. We do know that over 30 million people are being challenged by not being able to pay their rent or their mortgage. So they're facing eviction. We just don't know how many have been impacted. And instead of doing a rent freeze that should have happened at the beginning of the pandemic, like other countries were able to do, providing resources to people who live in their countries, right? And so like Canada, like Cuba, like Venezuela, like people actually being able to do that. This country, who is the richest country due to stolen wealth, did not provide a rent freeze. They gave us crumbs of a check, right? $1,200. Not everybody even received it. I think there's over like 12 million people who still haven't received it in this country. Instead of doing a rent freeze, what they just did recently is the federal government, through CARES Act, has been giving across the country rent assistance money. They could have just did a rent freeze. They could have did a rent freeze. So now people have been evicted. People don't have anywhere to live, or some people might be living with family. Now all of a sudden there's money out there through the CARES Act, through different city programs and nonprofit organizations to help with rent assistance. Why not from the jump provide a rent freeze? Because it pushes more people to be unsheltered. It further criminalizes people. It puts people through the court system. When you have an eviction, on your apartment, on your background check or whatever. It's harder for you to get an apartment. It just further again is the war against people who are impoverished, right? So it's all intentional. It's all part of white supremacy. It should have been a rent freeze from jump, right? And we should still be fighting for a rent freeze. There is no reason why anyone should be unsheltered. Even going back to what like Oliver and Bonnie was sharing, there's so many buildings that people could be living in, so many empty buildings, so many empty hotels that people could be living in. There's no reason why people should be put on the street. And like every day I have been meeting people who were evicted like in March and April when we supposedly had a moratorium, right, on evictions. It wasn't real. It was fake. So there is some money out there being provided by the feds, but from jump, it should have been a rent freeze, and it still should be. Also, next week, we're going to have the film series, and we're going to be showing Meteor Man. It's going to be a really great show and discussion. Come join us to talk about, like this African superhero who was against capitalism, was about helping the community, about helping the people. Make sure you join us for the film series next week. We also thank you all. What we just also saw recently pop up in the Albuquerque Journal today is a story about like Clifton White, right? So we also know during this pandemic, I'm sorry because I kind of jumped around, but during this pandemic, COVID cases are continuing to increase. There is a false narrative that things are going down. No, people have less access to testing. And I think I saw last week there's more testing sites happening through DOH. That's good. We need more testing sites. We don't need times cut down. People need to be tested, especially in winter months that we know that things are going to get worse, right? So we need more sites. But behind the walls, people are being left alone to suffer who have been tested positive for COVID. It is horrible. It is horrendous. It is continuously what this government does. These people should be held accountable, continue to contact them about the conditions people are facing behind the walls. So I also think about Clifton White, who's a political prisoner, and about what the former chief, whatever his role is at the Metropolitan Detention Center, we get to see the system in action, right? So what the system did was while he was incarcerated, was talking about get that nigger out of my jail, right? Basically along those lines, this is what the chief was saying, right? Text messaging with other political officials, right? Who, with our tax dollars on those cell phones that we pay for and they're paid for by our money, having these conversations, right, about our people. And we know that's how they see us. We know that's how they talk about us. It's just cut share to light. What sucks is he's being able to retire, right, and just live off retirement. We need to continue to call these people out. We need to continue to dismantle these systems. People cannot get well in a cell. We shouldn't have jails or prisons. They're just forms of plantation and continue ways to oppress our people, right? And so we are about abolishing prisons and abolishing all the systems that create harm to our communities. So I just wanted to share that. Check out the Albuquerque Journal. The report's been circulating. There's also some falsehoods in that report about Clifton White, but we also know how the media is, right? And that's why we have Pan-African Weekly News, to give you like really true media that's going to like share about issues that are impacting our people. Again, Clifton White never stole the car. He never had a curfew. He never failed to report. Right? This whole thing happened because what we see is $9.7 million, $10 million, $205 million of money into police force that is over policing our communities, especially in the International District. So they failed to manufacture crime against 4 young people, 2 Chicano young people, 2 African young people. Organizers intervened and Clifton White was one of them, right? So we have to continue to show up in our communities, right? Show up our communities, create safety hooks for our communities, to know that we will not accept violence amongst our people. And that's what we're talking about in this show, right? Like what the John Brown Breakfast Club was able to do downtown, what other groups like the Red Nation, the All African People's Revolutionary Party, Millions for Prisoners, what they are doing to build community so we take back our city, right? We take back our city, because right now it's in a state of state violence that is continuously wanting to lock up our people and toss them away to make money off of them, right? Because they are $100,000 each person locked up behind the walls, and it's just a profit. It's a profit system, but it profits off of our suffering. And we know what happens is people don't do time by themselves. Their community misses them. Their family misses them. They have loved ones who care about them. And we're going to be fighting to abolish all these prisons that create so much harm. And we're going to be closing. And so who are we? We are the African People's Revolutionary Party. If you are not part of an organization and you are African, please message us. We do a lot in the community. We have our elder care program. We're working on rent assistance, rent strike. We do political education. We have our weekly Pan-African film series. We want you to join us. We want you to join us as African people. If you're not African, there are many different organizations that you can get involved in. Your voice, your involvement in the community is critical. This work cannot be done without you. All these grassroots efforts are so critical. We are working toward having a unified, socialist, free Africa. We are working toward African liberation. We want you to join us, right? Reach out to us on Facebook Messenger. If you know us, if you have our phone numbers, you can call us. And we also know when Africa is free, everyone will be free. And in closing, just sharing, stay ready for the revolution. Look forward to seeing y'all out in community together.